The streetlights flickered as Daniel walked down the dimly lit sidewalk, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his worn-out jacket. The air was crisp, carrying whispers of conversations from passing strangers. He kept his head low, not one to draw attention. Daniel had learned to move unnoticed, blending into the background. His clothes, faded jeans, a thrift store hoodie, and scuffed sneakers, were a silent testament to his struggles. They weren't fashionable. They weren't impressive. They simply were what he had. He entered the community hall, where a small group had gathered for an evening discussion. As he stepped inside, he could feel it, the unspoken judgment. Their eyes flickered to his attire, then quickly away. Some whispered. Others simply stared, their silent opinions wrapping around him like an invisible chain. Daniel was used to this. He had heard the murmurs before. Doesn't he have anything better to wear? Why doesn't he put in more effort? He looks like he's struggling. I wonder what's wrong with him. But that night, something was different. As he took a seat in the corner, an older man, dressed in a crisp suit, stood up and addressed the room. "Tonight, I want to talk about perception," the man said, pacing slowly. "We look at people and make assumptions based on their words, their actions, and yes, even their clothing." Daniel felt his heart pound. It was as if the man had peered directly into his soul. The man continued, his voice calm yet piercing. "But what if I told you that the clothing you wear is not just fabric? What if it carries a greater message, one beyond human judgment?" A hush fell over the room. The air felt heavier. Then the man turned his gaze directly to Daniel. "Young man, would you be willing to stand up?" Daniel hesitated. His instincts screamed no, but something deeper, something unexplainable, urged him forward. Slowly, he rose to his feet. "Look at him," the man said, scanning the audience. "What do you see?" The room was silent. Some shifted in their seats. A woman in the front row cleared her throat. "He looks like he's been through a lot." The man nodded. "And what else?" A younger man hesitated before speaking. "He looks like someone who's struggling to fit in." Daniel's chest tightened. He had always felt invisible, yet now he was standing in a room full of people exposed. The older man smiled knowingly. "Now, let me tell you what I see." He walked closer to Daniel, his voice softer but no less powerful. "I see a survivor. I see someone who has endured, someone who has chosen to show up despite the weight of the world pressing down on him." Daniel swallowed hard. No one had ever said that before. The man continued. "And do you know what God says?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "God says, man looks at the outward appearance, but I look at the heart." The room was still. "God does not measure your worth by the fabric on your skin," the man said. "He sees your struggles, your pain, your perseverance. And while others may judge what they can see, he knows the battles you have fought." A strange warmth filled Daniel's chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel insignificant. He felt seen not by human eyes, but by something greater. The man turned back to the audience. "So, before you speak about someone's clothing, remember, you may not know the way of the life they carry beneath it." The murmurs had stopped. The judgment had been replaced by something deeper, understanding. And in that moment, Daniel knew. He had been carrying the wrong burden all along. Daniel sat in his small apartment later that night, the words from a meeting still echoing in his mind. God does not measure your worth by the fabric on your skin. He ran his fingers over his hoodie, feeling its frayed edges. For years, he had been defined by his appearance, not just by others, but by himself. He had let the world's judgment dictate his worth, believing the whispers that said he was less because he didn't look the part. But what if that had never been true? The next morning, Daniel walked the same path to work. He had been given an opportunity as a delivery assistant at a small bookstore, a job that barely paid the bills but kept him going. As he entered the shop, he heard them again, the whispers. A group of co-workers stood near the register, their voices hushed but not enough to be unheard. He always wears the same hoodie. I wonder if he even cares about his appearance. Maybe if he put in more effort, things would change for him. Daniel clenched his fists. He wanted to yell, to defend himself, to make them see. But then, The older man's voice from last night returned to him. Before you speak about someone's clothing, remember, you may not know the way of the life they carry beneath it. He took a breath. Then another. He didn't need to explain himself to them. Still, the thoughts gnawed at him throughout the day. Did appearance really matter that much? Could clothes truly determine how someone was treated? That evening, as he walked home, he passed by a high-end clothing store. The mannequins stood tall behind glass, dressed in pristine suits and elegant dresses. People walking by stopped to admire them, some even taking pictures. Daniel hesitated, then did something he had never done before. He stepped inside. The air smelled different in there, expensive, refined. The lighting was soft, designed to highlight perfection. Almost instantly, he felt out of place, his worn-out sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. A saleswoman approached, her smile polite but her eyes scanning him. "Can I help you?" Daniel felt the weight of her question. It wasn't genuine curiosity. It was skepticism. He glanced around. The price tags were absurd. A single jacket cost more than his entire rent. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a mirror near the dressing rooms. He walked toward it slowly, then stopped. For years, he had looked in mirrors and only seen less. He had seen someone who wasn't enough, someone who didn't belong. But now he saw something else. He saw resilience. He saw survival. He saw himself. Daniel straightened his shoulders. His clothes might not be new, but they carried his journey. Every late night, every hardship, every moment he had chosen to keep going instead of giving up. And wasn't that worth something? As he stepped out of the store, he knew he was done chasing the approval of those who only looked at the surface, because the surface had never told the full story. The next morning, Daniel woke up feeling different. It wasn't that his problems had disappeared. His bank account was still nearly empty. His clothes were still the same, and the world still judged by appearances. But something inside him had shifted. He wasn't carrying the same weight anymore. At work, the whispers came again. But this time, Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't shrink himself. Instead, he moved with purpose, his posture straight, his head held high. A coworker, Jake, noticed. "You seem different today." Daniel smiled. "Maybe I am." Jake hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Doesn't it bother you?" Jake asked, his voice quieter now. "The way people talk, the way they judge." Daniel studied him for a moment. Jake always looked sharp, pressed shirts, polished shoes, the kind of guy who seemed to have it all together. But now, there was something else in his eyes. Doubt, insecurity. Daniel exhaled. "It used to, but then I realized their words don't define me. And honestly, most people who judge others are just trying to hide their own insecurities." Jake swallowed, his gaze dropping slightly. "Yeah, I get that." For the first time, Daniel saw it. The fear beneath the perfection. Jake, with all his tailored clothing and carefully curated image, wasn't as confident as he seemed. That night, as Daniel walked home, he found himself passing by the community hall again. The same old man from before stood at the entrance, as if waiting for him. "You came back," the man said, smiling. Daniel nodded. "I think I needed to." The man gestured toward the dimly lit street. "You know, the world will always try to measure you by things that fade. Your clothes, your money, your status. But do you know what God sees?" Daniel's heart pounded. He already knew the answer. "He sees the heart," Daniel whispered. The man smiled. "Exactly. The world judges the outer shell, but God looks deeper. He sees the battles you fought, the kindness you've shown, the faith that keeps you moving forward. That's what truly matters." For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt free. He had spent years trying to prove his worth through things that didn't matter. But now he understood. His value had never been in the fabric on his skin. It had always been in the strength of his soul. As he walked away, the night air felt lighter. The world hadn't changed, but he had. And that was enough, because God had seen him all along.